Today, I'm going to share some of our favorite family read-alouds. Over the years, especially since we started homeschooling, we have read hundreds of books together. Since I love to read, then of course I wanted to share books with my daughters. Homeschooling really adds to that because we're able to read so much for all of our subjects. We usually try to have a fun book that has nothing to do with school going at night too. And at 17 and 13, they still like me to read aloud to them, which I love. In fact, unfortunately, my kids hate audiobooks. I keep hearing people talk all the time about how their kids love audiobooks and they can listen to them all the time, but my kids don't ever want to listen to them because they want me to read. And I even thought once about, well, maybe I should make my own and then I can sit and do stuff while we listen to them, but I'd have to make them anyway, so it takes the same amount of time. So I might as well just sit with the book and read to them while they draw. Both of my daughters are artists, and so that's what they like to do, usually. Sometimes they sew, sometimes they draw, but they love being read aloud too. Since I'm just starting the BookTube channel now, I'm just going to share in the past what we've read that have been our favorite books, our favorite read-alouds. In the future, I will share as we go along, every term of school probably, I will share the things that we've read during that term that were their favorites. The first pile are the books that we've really enjoyed and talked a lot about or have affected our life in some way, but aren't necessarily the absolute favorites. First is Little Pilgrim's Progress. This is a retelling from John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, but it's written for kids and the main characters are children. And we've read this twice now, and it lends itself for a lot of discussion and it's just a fun journey. We've also really liked the childhood of famous American books, especially Abigail Adams and Martha Washington. Those were really fun books. We really enjoyed Charlotte's Web. My oldest daughter has said, though, that this is what made her want to become a vegetarian. She is not a vegetarian, but she doesn't eat pork products. And this was the seed of that. Pigs are her favorite animal. So they weren't at that time yet. At that time, it was still ponies, but I think that put a little seed in her brain. We've also really enjoyed The Westing Game, which I loved since that was one of my favorites as a child, one of the books that got me reading. We really enjoyed the Green Ember series. However, I have finished the series, but we haven't finished it as a family. Every time we started getting to the last few books, they would kind of lose interest. So I'm hoping that we can get back to that eventually, because I do think it ended well. They haven't liked all of the Roald Dahl books, but we really did like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Matilda. And Matilda is my favorite. One of our favorite history read-alouds was Carry On, Mr. Bowditch. This book was so inspiring, and I just think we all learned a lot from it. There were times when they got a little bored during it. I never did, but there were a few times when they wanted the story to move along more quickly, but overall we enjoyed it. Our first year of homeschool, we read The Candy Bomber, the story of Berlin Airlift's chocolate pilot, and this was really exciting because he visited Utah soon after that, and we were able to meet him before he died. And so this one really is meaningful to us. The next group of books are the ones that have been almost favorites. We've loved them, but they're not the absolute favorites, for my kids at least. So, The Trumpet of the Swan. This was a book I had never heard of until we started homeschooling, and then it was on a list I was looking at. And it tells the story of this cute little swan, and he has this trumpet, and it's just so cute. It made us laugh out loud. It was so heartwarming. It's still one of my favorites. We also really enjoyed reading the Fablehaven series together. My youngest did not like this as much as my oldest did. She did not end up finishing the whole series with us. It was one that we read at nights, and I think she got through book 2 or 3, and then my oldest daughter and I read the whole series together. Another one similar to that is The Chronicles of Narnia. Both daughters gave The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe 5 stars. This was the first book we read together as a family that they both gave 5 stars to, but neither one of them loved the way the series ended. And so they wouldn't say it's their favorite series, but they did really like that book. Another series we really loved was the Little House on the Prairie series. I have so many fun memories of this because the first time we read The Little House on the Prairie, the first book, my kids were still pretty young and we lived in Wisconsin at the time. So we were visiting Utah to visit family, and I made my daughters little prairie dresses, and we stopped at a bunch of their sites along the way. We even stayed the night in a bunkhouse on their property in De Smet, South Dakota, and it was so much fun. My youngest was very small then, and she had her little prairie dress on, her little bonnet, and she was running down the hill. And in my mind, the music from the show was playing, And right then she fell, just like Carrie did in the show opening. So I wish I would have had that on video. I don't, but it was a really fun experience. So we read the rest of the series throughout the next few years after that as they got older. And their very favorite book, and probably mine too, was Farmer Boy, which surprised me. This was one I had never read before that, and we all really enjoyed it. My daughters both really like the Jennifer Nielsen books. I think that she is one of the best historical fiction writers out there for children. Honestly, for adults too, because I can read her historical fiction and I get excited and I get the story, but I don't have any of the extra stuff that is sometimes thrown into adult historical fiction. And Jennifer Nielsen is my oldest daughter's very favorite author, but that's mainly for her fantasy books. But these were the two historical fictions we read together in school: Lines of Courage, which was World War I, and A Night Divided, about the Berlin Wall. And these both were captivating to my daughters. They loved them. Another favorite, it's one of my favorite books, A Place to Hang the Moon. I was really glad that we read this after Narnia too, because they were able to see the connections throughout the whole book with Narnia, and we loved reading it. Of course, Anne of Green Gables. We read this one together since it had anime type art, and both of my daughters really love that. That's the kind of art that they draw. And I want to have this in the very, very favorites because it is my very favorite, but I wouldn't say it's been their favorite read aloud. It's just one of the very close to favorite read alouds. So the last grouping of books is the very favorite read alouds. These are the ones they absolutely loved, couldn't stop talking about, begging to read another chapter. We've really loved the Totally True Adventures, but their favorites were Climbing Everest, and then my oldest daughter's favorite book, she would probably say it's one of her absolute favorites she's ever read, let alone in homeschool, and it was George Washington's Spies. She's really into coding, and her dream job would be to be a spy. She says a spy ninja that figures out codes and puzzles, and so this was a really, really fun book for her. The next one is a trilogy. It's the Wilder King trilogy. It starts with The Bark of the Bog Owl, and then there's The Secret of the Swamp King and The Way of the Wilder King. These are a biblical retelling, fantasy, and I loved them, but I was not prepared for how much my family would. I actually read these out loud while we were staying with my parents for a few months when our house was being built, and I read them out loud at night to my daughters and my mom and dad. And my dad was begging for more chapters too. So afterward, my oldest daughter, she wants to be a writer, and she had told me that she didn't realize how well you could write fantasy that had some violence and some wars and things in it, and also have the faith element, and that really inspired her. And it's not that violent. They're not bad. All right, now for the top three. The Harry Potter series. They love Harry Potter as much as I do. Thank goodness. Maybe not as much as I do, but we've read the entire series now, I think 3 times together. And usually when we read it together, we end up having a Harry Potter party afterward, which is really fun, where I do classes and we have treats and things, and it's very fun. However, the surprise that probably is a controversial opinion, their favorite Harry Potter book is The Cursed Child. You heard me right. This was hard to read out loud to them. I had to change it as I was reading it. Since it is a play, I would read it and try to make it sound like it was written in novel form while I was reading it, because reading it as a play just didn't sound right. But they loved it. Scorpius and Rose are my oldest daughter's favorite Harry Potter characters. Well, Scorpius probably. And I had told them that I liked it a lot, and I was surprised at how many people didn't like it. But I didn't think that they would like it the most out of all of them. But they do. So I hope that someday we can see the play in person. And then the top, probably their very favorite of all that we've ever read, are the Vanderbeekers. So we are on the very last book right now. My 17-year-old told me one time that she wished she could step through the pages into this world. She loves it so much. And we've grown to love the Vanderbeeker family. They are a little chaotic and crazy sometimes. There's animals everywhere. We don't have any pets, so we can't relate to that. We live in a small town. We can't relate to living in New York City, but we've been able to step into their family, and their family is so close and love each other so much. And we've loved that. And they just, every night they beg for more chapters. So what are your favorite read alouds? What have you read with your kids that you've loved? What have been your children's favorite books you've read aloud to them? Do you read aloud to your kids? Have you stopped reading aloud to them as they got older, or do they still love it like my kids do? And again, I will update with books as we go along.